And so what we're going to talk today about is allergies and how allergies, what they have to do with learning. Is anybody in here allergic to anything medical? What are you allergic to?
I'm allergic to penicillin.
Is that right? Okay, gotcha. I thought you were going to say you were allergic to like something in here. I had a student one time. This guy was probably in his 40s. He's a big gruff guy. He's from Chicago. He had a big gruff voice. And he came in the first day when I was teaching in New Albany, and he said, "Just so you'll know, I've got anger issues." I said, "Okay, well, that's good to know. Appreciate you telling me up front." I said, "What are your triggers?" I thought that might be handy to know what might set him off. He said, "Studying." This should be fun. And he did a great job, as it turned out, once we kind of got him used to it. And so if you're allergic to, you said penicillin, right? Is anybody allergic to anything in the environment, rather, like pollen or pet hair or any peanuts, anything like that? You don't get hay fever in the springtime?
I'm allergic to pine trees.
Pine trees? Okay, so like the pine tree. You'd love my house where there's nothing but pine trees around.
No.
So, y'all know how medical allergy works, right? Do y'all know sort of what happens if you're allergic to something, whether it's penicillin or pine trees or pollen or whatever it is?
You have an allergic reaction.
Yeah, you have a reaction. Do you know why that is? All right, let me tell you. This is how allergies work. Basically, your body thinks that some substance is bad for you, even though it's not. Let's say that you have hay fever. People are allergic to pollen. And here in about another month or so, stuff's going to start blooming. Pollen's going to be flying around everywhere. Your car's going to be green because of all the pollen around. And so let's say that you breathe in some of that pollen. Now, if you're allergic to pollen, like I am, what happens is that when you get exposed to that pollen, when you breathe in the air and the pollen comes in there, your body thinks that pollen is bad for you, even though it's not. Pollen, as far as we know, is not bad for anybody. It doesn't hurt anything if you could pick a flower, okay? But your body thinks it is. Why is it that your body thinks it's bad for you? We don't know. We still don't really have a good answer for why people are allergic to things. There's different theories out there about, exposure when you're a kid and that kind of thing, but there's nothing really definite that I've seen. But that's what happens. Basically, your body, for some reason, thinks that pollen or peanuts or whatever it is, pine tar, is allergic to you. Sean, what happens to you if you come in contact with pine tar?
Headaches and congestion.
Okay, you swell up, right?
Maybe sneezing.
Yeah. So what happens?
Swelling.
Okay, so what happens to Mr. Sean there, if he gets exposed to, say, some pine tar, is that his body produces antibodies. Your immune system, your body treats that allergen as though it's something that's bad for you that your immune system has to attack. And so the immune system attacks it. Your immune system produces antibodies, which is what your body uses to attack something that's bad for you. And then it releases something called histamines. This is why if you have hay fever, you have to take antihistamines to reduce it. But when those histamines are released, your body reacts to protect you from that bad old pollen that's so bad for you. Your body thinks, okay? And what happens then? Face swells up, right? Your sinuses just get really congested because everything's swelling up. And this is a reaction, say the swelling, for instance, this is just your body's defense system. Has anybody ever turned their ankle before, playing basketball or whatever? Well, if you turn your ankle, what happens to the ankle? It swells up, and it swells up, that's to protect it. It's kind of like a cast, okay? And so it's there to protect the tissue. So this is what happens in real allergies. Now, oftentimes, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong about this, the way that we approach learning is that we have sort of a learning allergy. Does this sound familiar to anybody? As you try to learn something and you feel kind of like you're allergic to it? This is not a real thing documented in science. This is an analogy I'm using, okay? But we do feel like we're allergic. Anybody in here, is there any subject that you study that you feel like you're allergic to?
Language.
What's that?
Language.
Language, okay. What'd you say? Math? Yeah, a lot of people have math allergies, okay. All different kinds of things. We feel like we're allergic to it. And this sounds silly, but let's look at the parallels here. For regular allergy, like we say, your body thinks that some substance is bad for you. In a learning allergy, your mind thinks that some cognitive task like learning is bad for you. Your brain just sort of feels like it's bad for me to learn. We don't know why we have allergies, but why would we feel like we're allergic to learning? Well, haven't we heard all of our lives that stress kills? That stress is bad for you? That if you're under too much stress, it's going to affect your mind, it's going to affect your body, it's going to make you sick, all this sort of thing. And indeed, chronic stress, where you're constantly stressed out by the same things over and over again, that is in fact bad for you. Raises your blood pressure. I think something like 80 to 90% of doctor visits are for a stress-related condition. That is, stress has made it worse. All right? So we've heard this all of our lives. Stress kills. You don't want to have too much stress, right? Well, is learning stressful? Do y'all find learning stressful? Yeah. So what happens then, well, maybe that's it. Or maybe if you're an adult ed student, you may have been told throughout your life that you're never going to amount to anything, or that you're too dumb to learn, or all this sort of stuff, which is nonsense, of course. But if you hear it over and over again, it's easy to start believing it, isn't it? Especially if you hear it when you're a kid, right? And so what happens then is something that psychologists call learned helplessness, where you just sort of naturally think, well, if it's not going to do any good for me to try to learn, why would I bother, right? And that's just sort of a natural state of affairs. And so that can cause us to be sort of allergic to learning. Whereas in a real allergy, your body produces those antibodies and histamines that I was talking about. In this learning allergy, your body produces adrenaline and cortisol. Do y'all know what those are? Those are what we call stress hormones. And that's what sort of jacks your body up and makes you anxious. Does anybody have test anxiety? Everybody has test anxiety, including me, okay? And so we get all stressed out. And so our bodies, in real allergies here, your body acts to protect you and causes swelling and this kind of thing. In this learning allergy that I'm talking about, your mind reacts to protect you from this really stressful learning by making you feel uncomfortable. You said language was your big stressor. Do you feel uncomfortable when you're trying to read a difficult passage?
Oh, it's just essays for me.
Essay, when you're trying to write an essay, do you feel uncomfortable when you're trying to do it and not able to do it? I think you said math, right? Have you ever felt really uncomfortable and stressed out when you're trying to work a math problem and you can't work it?
I ain't gonna lie, I don't think I'm a bad kid, but when I was in 6th grade, my teacher, I was so stressed out, and I got mad, and I flipped the desk over, and my teacher left the school and she quit.
Is that right?
She quit her job the same day.
The guy, wow.
No, it was a female teacher.
The guy I was telling you about that said his anger issues were studying, yeah, I saw it. He threw stuff across the room and all kinds of stuff. Okay. He got over it, but, I know exactly what you're talking about, but you feeling uncomfortable, it's almost as if your mind is trying to protect you from this learning that's so stressful by making you feel uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So back to medical allergies. Let me tell you about a research study that was done that hopefully won't be too boring for you, but that will help drive this point home. Do y'all know anybody who's allergic to peanuts, who has peanut allergies? Okay,
I know
gotcha.
a girl that's allergic to peanuts, eggs, and bacon.
Okay, allergic to bacon, that hurts. So let's say that, because I like bacon. So they did a study with kids, 50 kids, aged 7 to 17 who had peanut allergies. Okay, so we're doing peanut allergies. They, before I tell you what they did with them, I want you to understand, I just kind of played on the whole theme here. That's me. So before I tell you what they did in this study, I want to emphasize, if you know someone who has kids who have peanut allergies, This is not to be tried at home, okay? This was done at Stanford Medical Center, one of the premier medical schools in the United States and therefore in the world. They had clinicians, they had researchers, best trained people in the world monitoring these kids while they did this, okay? So that's my disclaimer. So they brought these 50 kids in, ages 7 to 17, who had peanut allergies, and they gradually exposed them to peanuts. I don't know if they had like peanut dust, powder, or what, I don't know, but they exposed them a little bit at a time to peanuts, and a little more, and a little more, and a little more. As you might imagine, they had unfortunate difficulties, allergic reactions. If you're allergic to peanuts and they start giving you peanuts, you're probably going to have an allergic reaction, right? And that's what happened to them. They had itchy mouths, again, that itchiness, you know, if you're allergic to something, congestion, like I was talking about, the swelling, anxiety because of it, of course, was another side effect of that. And so they started having that as they went through. As it turns out, in that case, those allergic reactions are actually their bodies getting used to the allergen, getting used to the peanuts, okay? Again, they had to do this in a very controlled setting. But that's what it is. All those allergic reactions, their body's just kind of getting used to it. So here was the experiment. They divided them into two groups. And the first group, they said, you're having these allergic reactions. We hate that you're going through this discomfort. I mean, they were really, bothering them. They said, we're sorry. We know this is very bothersome. We know it's uncomfortable. But it's just an unfortunate side effect. We wish we had better news for you, but that's just kind of the way it works. You just have to put up with it. And the other 25 kids, the second group, they said, we know that you're having these side effects, these allergic reactions. We know it's uncomfortable, but that is actually how your body gets used to it. And it's a sign that your body is getting used to the peanuts. So it's actually a good sign. Even though it's uncomfortable, it's a good sign. It means it's working. Now, which of those two groups do you think did better? The second group did much better. Not only did they have less anxiety because they felt better about it, but they physically did better with the peanuts. As they began to expose them to more and more peanuts, increase their exposure, they had fewer symptoms. They got used to the peanuts sooner, just because of what they believed about it and how they approached it, as opposed to the first group where they just told them, we're sorry, it's just a side effect and you just have to live with it. They didn't do quite as well. Now, what does that have to do with learning? Well, let's think about how learning works. Let's say that you have a math allergy, okay? Let's look at the differences, or let's compare the similarities here. For a peanut allergy, they had this incremental exposure to the allergen, okay? They exposed them to more and more of it. In a quote-unquote math allergy, you might have incremental exposure to math in the classroom. When you start a math class, they don't give you the final exam the first day, do they? They give you a little bit at a time. They start you out easy, and then you do more and more and more, right? And as you're doing more and more, as they had more and more exposure to peanuts, they start to have these allergic reactions. As you have more and more exposure to math and start doing more and more, you have similar unfortunate difficulties, right? You feel agitated, you feel frustrated. Y'all all know this. You're trying to work a math problem, and everybody in here has worked a math problem that was too hard for them, right? Mm-hmm. I know I have. And when you do, that's when you start to experience that. You feel agitated, you feel frustrated. I've had students tell me before, I'm just not a math person. You ever felt that way? I'm just not I'm not cut out for this. I've had people tell me I don't have the math gene, like there's a gene that you have that makes you good at math, okay? But that's not exactly how it works. Over here in this experiment, they had two ways of explaining the difficulties to students. Well, in trying to do math or any other subject, it could be the same thing. You could explain it as an unfortunate side effect. Well, math is just hard and that's just how it is. Which would be like the first group over here, right? But there's another way that you could explain it too. Let me explain to you. Well, let me just finish this. You could look at it as it's just hard, or you could look at it as that frustration that you're feeling is a sign that it's working, which is an odd way to think about it. But let me explain this to you. Learning is not math or language, writing, anything else. Learning is not just you either got it or you don't. Learning works this way. When you're trying to learn something and you put your attention on it, you're trying to work those algebra problems, for instance, okay? What happens is you start working on it, you put your attention on it, you really focus on it, because what you focus on is what gets into your memory. And that's all that gets into your memory, okay? So you really have to focus on it. And when you do, your brain has to change in order for you to learn anything, okay? Your brain has kind of like wiring inside it. Information travels from one part of your brain to the other, and that's how you're able to do anything, and that's how you know anything. And so when you learn new things, your brain starts to form these new connections within itself, okay? It's literal electricity that's passing from one part of your brain to another. That's how they're able to manage, put a skull, a cap on somebody's skull and measure their electrical activity. They're seeing what parts of the brain are active and where information is going from one part to another. Does that make sense to everybody? So when you're learning how to work some kind of equation, scientific notation, whatever it may be, when you're learning how to do that, your brain is forming these new connections. Your brain literally has to change in order to do this. And in order for your brain to change, this is the key part, in order for your brain to change in that way, what has to happen is your brain has to release chemicals within itself to make those changes take place. Does that make sense to everybody? It releases these chemicals, and that's what allows the brain to change in that way. And so when you start doing that, that's when you're learning. But it doesn't feel that way, does it? It feels like, I don't have what it takes, I'm not a math person, I don't have the math gene. That's how it feels. It feels frustrating. What that actually is a sign that you're starting to get it, even though it doesn't feel like it. Because when the reason it feels frustrating is this. One of the chemicals that your brain has to release in order for that change to take place is in fact adrenaline. And adrenaline makes you feel agitated. It's like drinking too much coffee. You just feel kind of edgy. That's what that frustration is. It's the adrenaline that is being released so that you can pay attention. That's adrenaline's, it makes you alert, okay? So the thing to remember is that when you're feeling frustrated because you're having trouble doing that math problem, it doesn't mean you don't have the gene, okay? It doesn't mean you're not a math person. It means that the right chemicals are being released so that your brain can change in the way that it needs to. Does that make sense to everybody? So in other words, the best way to look at it is this. If you want to be good at something, you just have to be willing to be bad at it for a little while. And you have to be willing to put up with it, with being bad at it. And just like the peanut allergies, as they got more and more used to it, as they had these reactions, that was a sign that they were getting used to it. When you're trying to work math, write an essay, study science, whatever it may be, understand something difficult. When you start to feel that discomfort, that just means that your brain is getting used to it. It's changing in the ways it needs to. And if you keep going, you're going to get good at it.